Welcome, everyone. As I mentioned also in the chat, if you want to go over to the poll, I would love to hear how you see the importance of branding today. So we're going to get started in just a couple of minutes, and I would love to hear your take beforehand. Also, what would actually be really helpful is in the chat, if you can share the role that you have and potentially the company that you work for. Is it B2B? Is it B2C? And where are you dialing in from? I would love to get a sense of who you all are. Sebastian is working for an AI startup in pharma. Exciting. Actually, that's part of my background as well, funnily enough. Evaluating social media. Yeah, really cool. Torsten and Samia, I can see that you have requested to speak. It would be great for now if you can also just put it in the chat, because that'll be much easier for us to coordinate now in the beginning, make sure we get as much information in as possible. Welcome, everyone. We've got some apps. We've got a Copenhagen School of Entrepreneurship. Great. Welcome, Sandra. Yes, climate startup. Adugna, great to have you. Okay, so I sent you a tiny poll to start with. How important is branding for a startup? And let's check it out. So actually, a majority of you, 57% of you say that it is very important. That's awesome. So after this talk, hopefully you'll be even more convinced of why that is the case. Some of you say it's somewhat important, but it seems to me, yeah, that those of you who are here are already interested in it. So yeah, let's see if we can dig into how exactly startups can approach this, why it actually is so important, where it really can lead you to, and how we get there together. So my name is Ida. I'm the founder of Becoming, and we help purpose-driven startups in particular, but also startups more broadly, with marketing and branding. And really, I think one important thing to just say at the beginning about us is that when you think of agencies, oh, hang on, Sebastian said our video broke. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Just type in the chat. Yeah? Works for me. Okay, cool. Seems to be working, but not seeing me, strangely enough. Okay, we did test it before. Can you see the presentation? Works now? Okay, just let me know if it's breaking again, and then, yeah, we'll make sure it's working. Of course, like, has a phone 4G as well, so cool. Yes, so I'm the founder of Becoming, and we help startups grow with marketing and branding. And it's really the case that agencies are shifting a lot right now. It's not enough anymore to just say, hey, we build websites, that's what we do, or do SEO, and that's what we do. What startups really need in particular are partners that can actually do a lot of different things and that can think holistically about strategy and think holistically about brands, because essentially this is the thing that really propels you to find your voice in your market. And the good thing about that, which we will get to, is that startups these days, they don't only want to market to the market that exists. You are usually innovators, right? You want to do things differently. And that means actually shifting the market towards your values or creating new markets for the stuff. And that requires a slightly different skill set and a more holistic way of thinking, which is really where marketing and branding is going. And for that reason, I'm so excited to be here today and to figure out with you together what that actually means. So let me hear from you, actually, in the chat. What does brand mean to you? You can throw out just keywords, like what comes to mind? What do you associate with it? Would love to hear your thoughts here. All right. Community. Yeah, that's good. That's true. Quality, standard, interesting. Identity. Brand is the story I want to tell. The customers associate your name with something. The values a company stands for. Yes. Okay. So this is actually great. This shows that you who are watching right now, Teresa, Kalle, all of you, you're already a bit ahead of most startups, because something I hear a lot, or the question I get, a startup will come to me and they'll send me something like this, and they'll ask me, is this a good brand? And the trouble is, I can't answer that, because branding is not design. Branding is not just the look and feel of a company. It's not just how you present yourself, but it's also how your company fits within a broader scope of your market, and how well all of those elements, including design, really express your values and your identity. So that's what I mean when I say that you're already a bit further ahead, because values and identity is a huge part of it. And maybe it would be helpful to break this down a little bit. I will say that there are many definitions of branding and marketing that are flying around. So this is how we see it. But basically, brand is your core. That is your purpose. That is your position in the market, which ultimately means also that it's differentiated from other players in the market. And based on that, based on your internal DNA and values and your external position, this is the kind of promise that your company is making towards the people that you sell to or the people that you serve of what it is that you offer. Marketing is the way that you communicate that in certain channels and with certain messages to actually build demand for your product and service. So marketing is more specific to the specific product and service that you want to put out at any given time, whereas branding is the overall core of the company. And obviously the brand can host a lot of products, but marketing is more about specifically getting the product out there. And as someone also said, building community around that. And then communications is how you can also scale that in terms of, building greater awareness, building greater reputation. And I also want to add here another concept, advertising. And that's basically marketing or communications that's paid for. And I'm sure one thing you've heard a lot from startups, maybe you've said this yourself, is we got this many customers with no marketing. This is something that startups love to tell investors, right? But what you actually mean is we got this many customers without advertising, because marketing is actually about understanding your user, understanding your customer, understanding their needs, and then finding a way to translate the core of your brand in a way that positions it toward what their exact needs are and develop products that actually match that. So marketing is much more strategic. It's much more empathetic than what we sometimes think of it as, at least by our definition here. So the title of this talk is how you should think about branding as a startup. And I'm going to give you 3 ways that I think you should think about it. The first one is thinking about brand as an investment. And I don't mean that in terms of an investment strategy with investors, I mean an investment in your company. So if you look at this is actually very fascinating research coming from quite a long study, and I'm happy to send you the link as well. So basically what you see here on the black line is what happens and how you can sort of gain customers when you focus on sales or when you focus on this short-term activation of customers around a certain product. And what you see with this green or teal line is what happens over time once you focus on brand building. And as you can see, there's, I don't know if you can see that in particular at the bottom, but basically brand starts taking off after about 6 months. That's when you can start to see that your brand building is really gaining momentum and gaining you more traction for your product than you would ever have received if you only did sales and had this sort of linear approach of gaining every customer one at one. And why is that then? So the thing with brand is that people really want to feel connected these days to the companies that they buy from, or how we like to think of it now, more the companies that serve us and help us solve our problems. So 89% of consumers stay loyal to brands that share their core values. And actually, there's a 3 times greater word of mouth for brands that create an emotional response. And if you think about how to create an emotional response, of course, values is a key way to get there. And why is that important? Well, because 92% trust word of mouth more than any other type of advertising. So if you only think about it, not just in terms of your inner value system and that you want to have a strong brand, you want to have a core because you believe it's right, even only from a business point of view, this is the single strongest way that you can over time gain a real audience and a real customer base for your products and services. And when we think of brand, I'm sure I'm not the only one that pretty much immediately thinks of Apple. And I found this quote because it really exemplifies it so beautifully. This is the guy who's a creative tech blogger who discovered Apple, and he's describing what that was for him, that ever since he switched to Mac, he knew that there was something that connected with him on a personal level. And he says, from the consistency in their product designs to the passion behind what they stand for, Apple has quickly become one of my favorite brands of all time. And honestly, I don't see that changing anytime soon. I'm now an Apple fan for life. So those of you who mentioned community, this is what happens. If you have a really strong value system and a really strong emotional connection to the people that you serve, they become your fan club. And that is an investment that you make in the future of your company and the future of your sales, basically, and the survival of the company. So, second way to see it. Of course, it's not just about the business in terms of sales, revenue, customers. It's actually about what it can do for you internally. So in that sense, branding is a compass. I might guess that most of you know Patagonia. So they are a clothing brand that are focused on sustainable clothing and trying to shift the era of fast fashion towards sustainable, slow, durable fashion that takes full responsibility for nature as well as people in the supply chain. So if we look at what this did for Patagonia in terms of how they developed their brand, the first thing it did was that it shifted the influence on product. So Patagonia started as a mountain climbing gear company. And if they would have said, that's what we are a mountain gear climbing company, then it would have been much harder for them to actually transition to become a global clothing company, which is now what they are. So by finding their value system and by actually describing their vision more broadly than only in the context of this one outdoor area where they started, they built, you can think of it like a roof of a house where every room is a different product, but the roof stays the same. And this is what brand can really does. It can influence your product development to make sure that everything you build is in line with your values, but also then that you have the room to grow outside of the very first product that you build. The second thing is operations. Because Patagonia in this case are so clear about their commitment to sustainability, it means that the way they structure their supply chain, for example, yesterday even, my partner tried to buy a Patagonia jacket in a store. They didn't have the right size. And so they asked the person working there, is there another one? Is there a possibility to order one? And the person just said, sorry, Patagonia, they don't do this immediate delivery. You have to think in advance. That's part of their supply chain. And this means that their brand promise has translated all the way down through supply chain and operations. HR, so talent, which is super, super important for a startup, obviously. Patagonia get over 9,000 applications for every internship and similar numbers for their full-time roles. And actually, there's also some really interesting research that a strong brand like this, a values-driven brand, also positively impacts retention once you do hire people, because there's a stronger sense of connection to the company, obviously a stronger sense of connection to the mission. And this actually turns your talent and your employees into advocates for the brand itself. So you're not only then branding towards customers, you're literally creating this cohesive values collective also internally that then translates into the business itself. So it becomes the system orientated around your brand. And then, of course, most of us here are also thinking about investment and making sure that we have a strong financial round. And I mean, on this, investors look for traction, they look for scale, they look for talent. So if you can show that your brand opens up the potential and your market definition opens up the potential for many more products in the future that will evolve with the same brand promise, that shows you the potential of scale. If you can use this kind of value-based brand positioning to gain your first customers, and you heard just then, like the guy from Apple, like he just loves the brand. If you can show this type of community and commitment, that shows traction. It's a very credible thing to portray that comes from this strong values connection. Talent is not only you on the team, but also showing that you're a visionary that can attract other people to join your team. And in the early stages, this is also what we invest in. And it requires this definition of purpose and values and vision to really convey that in a credible way. And that is what you can achieve if you have a very strong brand and a strong core in that sense. So the third way we can think about this is as a unique selling point. And I'm sure I mentioned Apple, and this is also where most of our brains go to in this kind of conversation, because when we think about selling points, one of the most common pitfalls or mistakes that I see with startups, and I mean, really no hard feelings because this happens so easily, but it's very tempting, especially in technology, to focus on the literal selling points of the functionality. So focusing on functionality and features. And this here is a big classic. If you Google 2000s IBM advertisement, this is the kind of thing you will get. So along the side of the laptop, they're saying, you know, this is the kind of display, this is the kind of processor, this is the kind of speed you can expect, and it's just all the classic selling points of features. And then what happened? If you Google 2000s advertisements for Apple, no features. Where are the features? This is only a positioning around saying, we are different. We believe in innovators. We believe in people that break the rules, where the black tie is not a requirement, it's an option, because you have choice and you are that person. And we as Apple are the ones that empower you to be different and to think different in the world. So if you look at these two together, it shows that Apple understood that brand can create this emotional connection that, you know, lays the groundwork to sell, in that case, not just laptops, but as we know them now, obviously iPads, AirPods, iPhones, whatever, because we're buying it because we're different when we interact with them, not because they have certain features. And over the long run, this really creates the momentum for your company that is very hard to build if you focus only on one specific product and some specific features. And it can, in the end, also mean that the very, very best brands are an expression of the founders in some way, because there's a reason why you started this company. There's a reason why you are on this mission. And when we think about that slogan, think different, so many of us are going to think immediately of Steve Jobs, because that was his mind, that was his approach, that was him. And another mistake or pitfall I see a lot with startup branding in technology in particular is that Apple, in this case, they did so well that we all just want to put on a turtleneck and we just want to be Steve Jobs. But this is not how you create a unique brand, because it wouldn't be unique. The strongest brands have a really clear value system that accurately reflect the founding team and the vision of that founding team. And that means that even though Apple is an amazing example of a really strong brand, it is amazing because it depends on that source, on Steve Jobs as a founder, on their particular market, on being differentiated against IBM in this case, for example. But that doesn't mean that you should always be Apple. It means that you should be you and that you should be different. And Gal just put in the chat that he's wearing a black turtleneck. No, no judgment. Just if you are someone who wears a black turtleneck, do it. Just make sure that you are authentic to your own vision. And interestingly enough, actually, as a partner for startups working on these topics, so much of what we do is helping you all feel more connected to who you really are, as opposed to who you think you should be. So we're only in a 20-minute keynote here. We're going to have a Q&A for 5 minutes and then a longer one in a separate room if you want after that as well. But just to round this off, so there are really 3 things I think you should do or can do right now. The first one actually is to look inwards. I know that one of the core questions of this talk was, how can we do this without breaking the bank? If you see time as directly equal to money, we might have that question on, on the table right now. But actually, what you should invest right now is some time. So reflect, like, what are actually your values? What is actually your vision? Can you put it on paper? And can you not only stop there, but actually write more like a manifesto of the principles that then are expressed in terms of your values? So, where Patagonia would say, we are sustainable, and that means we don't overproduce. Can you have that kind of mindset, those kinds of bullet points that you know that everyone working for you and with you will be aware of? Because that is the start of finding your internal DNA and your core. And what I also will say is, like, sometimes it's hard to find the real core of yourself without some kind of external mirror to that. So whether it's talking to someone who's not in the day-to-day operations of the company, or if it's about working with a partner, an agency, someone who has some kind of external perspective on what really makes you you, that also helps, because it's not so easy always to see it clearly for ourselves. The second thing is to differentiate. Are you trying to be Apple, or are you being yourself? That's the first question. The second question is, being differentiated means being differentiated in your industry. So when you look at other companies that are doing similar things in your market category, are you different to them? And that's the reason why I couldn't answer you in the beginning if that design that we saw, if that was a good brand. I couldn't tell you because I don't know the benchmarking of the industry. So take a look at your other competitors, or even just the people in your category, the companies in your category. Are you different? And then lastly, what I would say, you saw in that graph that in the first 6 months, the short-term kind of sales activation, or we might think of it also as in the marketing sense, more like paid ads, these kinds of things are important in the first 6 months or the first year. It's not the case that just because you commit to branding, it immediately results in this exponential understanding of your values. It takes a bit of time. So it is important to combine those short-term wins with the long-term branding. So as long as you start now with really defining your core and figuring out ways to integrate that into your messaging, it's also the case that you can for sure invest some budget right now in doing more of the paid ads, or investing your time in the more traditional business development if you're a B2B company. That's fine. Just make sure that you start the long-term brand investment right now because exactly that. It grows over time and it is an investment. So with that, let's take a 5-minute session here to answer some questions. I'm going to scroll back and you can please just keep it all coming if you want. Okay, so a question from Sebastian. But if most people trust the word of mouth, doesn't that mean that that your own personal branding is better, you're able to convince people of your own products? Actually, Sebastian, maybe you can clarify that one for me. I'm not sure I fully understand your question. Yeah. I mean, personal branding is also really important, actually, because as a founder in the very early stage, you are the representation of your company. And in the same way that branding is about the core of the company, obviously in the early stage, it is you and it is your personality. So taking some time to really reflect those values in your own channels, not only as a company, but you as a person, that actually goes a long way to attracting the first people that want to work with you, and also possibly your first customers and users. So it is true that personal branding is also an important part of an early stage company, and it can be a sort of shortcut, especially if you already have somewhat of a communication channel going for yourself as a founder, to start there, definitely. Kalle is asking, can't you include branding and performance marketing? Do you really need to do brand marketing campaigns separately? Okay, so this is really, really interesting and a good question. It is the case that branding is sort of a separate thing if we define it as the core, and then you have marketing that builds on that and the communication. But you're absolutely right that in the end, if brand is the core, it means it translates to everything else. So whatever it is that you're building in terms of your communication channels, branding is a part of that, because you would hope that the decisions you make on your creative, everything from your graphics to the text you write to the channels you choose, you would hope that they would reflect your values in one way or another. And this is the beauty of really having a clear manifesto, clear values, that you can use that as that compass to make decisions. So even if you're doing performance marketing and you're running tests, and as I said, like in the first 6 months, for example, this can be super important. And this is also how you build a better connection to people, through actually understanding what works for them and what appeals to them, which is also an important part of marketing. Then branding is in that, as long as you also include your values in the choices you make and the messages you put out. So, they're not entirely separate. They're definitely not. And it's just important that you have that first building block of really understanding the core of your company. So Kalle is asking, follow up on that. Can you build your brand through performance marketing? Okay, this is actually super important, because at Becoming, and sort of the reason why I founded this company is because I see that branding and marketing in itself is having a bit of a revolution right now. So when we think of traditional marketing, we think of initially getting to the sell. We think of using messages, communications channels to always get to the point of growing our revenue, growing our results, and as is inherent in the term performance marketing, all about performance, and usually in a very quantitative, numerical way. But actually, brands like Patagonia and brands like Apple, they have invested massively in building community, in building better stories, and actually in redefining their markets through communication, which means, yes, storytelling, PR, community building, other tools that actually change the market that you're in. So if you say, I'm just developing the next best phone in the consumer electronics market, go ahead and do performance marketing within that field. But for example, and someone else asked here for good examples from the startup world of people who did this, for example, Fairphone. They wanted to change the idea around consumer electronics by creating a truly sustainable smartphone. If that's the case, and they want to change the mindset of their market, they can't just do performance marketing of testing certain messages, paying for them, and measuring the numbers today, because they're not wanting to market to the market today. They're wanting to shift the market to something else that they will, evolve into tomorrow. And this is similar for Apple. They couldn't just market to the market that existed. They had to create something new. And if you have that kind of ambition, and if you are an innovator, it requires you to move beyond the performance mindset of right now what you're measuring over into this longer term brand building of the kind of market you're actually creating and the overall story you want to tell. So of course you can do performance marketing, but it really also depends on your actual goals and your product. So we have tons of questions here. I would really love to answer them all. I've been told we should be pretty strict, and it's already 5 past now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into the Q&A area, which is a separate URL. I'm just going to post it here. And then if you have any other questions, you can also just talk to me directly there, basically, and jump on it with me. And then, yeah, we can take it from there. And in the meantime, if you want to continue this conversation, because I love having it with you, and I'm really grateful that you're here, you can also connect with me on LinkedIn, and we can take it from there. So thanks so much for joining. Thanks for being a part of this, and see you in the Q&A.